didn't mean there's any specific civil law or formal biblical law, probably not even a quotable house rule. He just means he's going to require his kids to do what he says, and if they don't, there's going to be consequences. So Paul's informal law is that whenever he tries to do what's good, in Jewish context, this means to let the master of his good inclination rule him, the influence of his evil inclination is right there to cause trouble. Well, in verses 22 and 23, Paul speaks of his inner self versus his other parts. Now, his inner self is his regenerated mind. It is that spiritual part of him that is therefore directly affected by God's Holy Spirit that dwells within him. And this part of him, it naturally loves the Torah, completely agrees with God's law. But let's pause for a second. I'm going to meddle for a moment. Do you love God's law, or do you hate it? Do you agree with God's Torah, or do you disagree with it? Do you seek to know and to do God's law, or do you try to find ways to avoid it? Keep it separate from your life. See, Paul uses the inner self that loves and agrees with God's Torah over and against the other parts of his body that operate based on sin's law. He is once again paraphrasing the standard doctrine of Judaism of the first century AD that is called the doctrine of two masters. God's law is one master, sin's law is the other master. It's an opposing master. But always with Paul, it is the law of Moses that is equated to God's laws, and also with the good inclination. Paul continues to make the case that the hallmark of a true believer is that God's laws are what he or she goes by and strives to be obedient to. When we fail, we are in reality being obedient to sin's law. Now, I realize that so much of what we've talked about in the book of Romans is the law of Moses. You know why? Because Paul constantly brings it up, weaving it into his letter as a central feature. But it's also for the same reason that most of my time for Seed of Abraham Torah class has been spent creating and teaching Bible lessons on the Old Testament. It's because the Old Testament and the law of Moses is so vital for Christian spiritual health, as a guide for Christian living, has been neglected, not thrown into the dustbin as irrelevant, mostly due to man-made doctrines beginning with the earliest Gentile-controlled church that was openly anti-Jewish. The Old Testament and the law are something quite unfamiliar, foreign-sounding, materially misunderstood by the church in general. So a great deal of time's needed for me to explain what it is, what it isn't, where it fits, how to apply its principles, to make clear a proposition that most Christians have been told we must avoid. That obedience to the covenant of Moses and our direct connection to the covenant of Abraham, as spiritual seed of Abraham, those are the missing links to our faith. It is these things are the Rosetta Stone that help us to properly understand Yeshua and the New Testament. This is what leads us to rekindle our brotherhood with Israel and the Jewish people, and these are the things that enable